What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Florida State Seminoles are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Florida State did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Florida State. My projection, of course, for this team was 10-2, and then my prediction for them was also 10-2. And if you look back at my prediction for this team, I had them going to the ACC Championship, and I also had them going to the College Football Playoff as a top 4 team. But it was the complete opposite of that. Florida State coming off one of the most terrible seasons in the history of college football, going just 2-10. Yeah, 2-10, a team that was 13-1 in 2023. They take a big drop here in 2024. I don't think anybody expected them, to drop this big. I think a lot of people were kind of expecting them to have a step back of a year after their phenomenal season in 2023. But yeah, 2-10, and they did not even come close to making it to a bowl game. They did also not come close to winning a conference championship, and not even coming close to making it to the college football playoff. So a very, very disappointing and terrible season last year for Florida State, one of the worst teams in the Power 4, to be honest. And then you look at the schedule from last year. When you look at this schedule here for Florida State, it was a pretty tough schedule, especially in the non-conference. They had to play Memphis and Notre Dame. Memphis is a quality group of 5 team, and then, of course, Notre Dame ended up being, of course, the team that went to the national championship as the runner-ups. They also played Florida. Of course, the Gators ended up being a surprise team at the end of the year, and they only beat Charleston Southern in the non-conference. So this was a tough non-conference schedule, and then you look at their ACC schedule. Of course, they opened things up with Georgia Tech there in Dublin, Ireland. That's not really considered a home game or an away game, but it's considered out of the country. So yeah, Florida State lost that game, and that was probably where the disappointment started to come here for Florida State. And then after the 0-3 start, that's where the downhill started to go there for the Seminoles. You take a look at their home schedule, though. They played California. They actually beat Cal here. That was the only win they had in the ACC last year, so they beat Cal. They also played Clemson at home and North Carolina also at home, so they had some, a couple of, home games that were really tough there with North Carolina and Clemson. Clemson ended up being good, but North Carolina maybe wasn't as good as we thought they were going to be. But then you look at their road schedule. They played at SMU, at Duke, and at Miami. So some of these teams in the ACC ended up being maybe as good as we thought they were not going to be honest. I mean, that's pretty much the reason why I think the schedule ended up being tougher here for the Seminoles. But it was just absolutely awful of a season here for 2024. Will they get over it in 2025? Let's take a look at the schedule coming up for 2025. This is that schedule for Florida State. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Florida State plays in the non-conference for this season. So you look at this non-conference schedule, it's once again pretty tough in my opinion. They will, of course, play Alabama out of the SEC. That's their big non-conference game instead of Florida. That's definitely a huger game than the Florida game. But, they'll play Alabama here at home, and then they play East Texas A&M, Kent State. So a couple of cupcakes, and then you got Florida here on the road. So they play Florida every year, but this time they will play them on the road. That is definitely going to be a tricky test there for the Seminoles because Florida, I think they're going to be pretty good this year. This is a team that looks like it's heading in the right direction with, Billy Napier now. It took them a while, but, I just feel like they have a bright future now at the quarterback position. And then Alabama, of course, will be tough. The good news is for the Seminoles, it's a home game, but this is a tough non-conference schedule. It's a little bit tougher compared to last year. Last year, you had to play Notre Dame, but, this year you got to play a couple of Power 4 teams in Alabama and Florida, and they're both out of the SEC. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now go to the home ACC schedule for the Seminoles. They will play 4 home games in the ACC. They'll play Miami, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, and Virginia Tech. So they play Miami, of course, every year because of the rivalry. They will play that game at home this year. Miami is going to be a pretty talented team again, and then you got Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, and Virginia Tech. these were all pretty average teams last year. Wake Forest wasn't really good, but these are all games that are really winnable for Florida State. So I think the home schedule is not too bad, but your biggest home game is definitely that Miami game. Yeah, that's going to be a game that Florida State's going to had to come out motivated in order to win it. So yeah, Miami, they get them at home this year. So that's your home schedule. Let's now go to the away schedule here for the Seminoles. They'll play 4 away games in the ACC. They'll play on the road at Virginia, at Stanford, at Clemson, and at NC State. So the road schedule is a little bit tough here for Florida State, but Virginia and Stanford and NC State, I think those are very winnable games. But Clemson and Death Valley, that's going to be obviously tough, having to play them on the road. They beat them a couple years ago in Death Valley, but it's definitely a different story compared to last year and definitely, from the year before. So, yeah, Virginia, that could be somewhat of a tricky game, and same thing with NC State. Virginia's not a tough place to play, but NC State is. Those will be a couple of trap games. And then, of course, Stanford, having to travel out west, that's always kind of tough here when you come a newcomer in the ACC. So, yeah, the away schedule could be a little bit worse, but it's a little bit of a tough schedule in the, away games, but it's not really that bad. So that's your away schedule. Let's now go back to the schedule here and go full game by game now for the Seminoles. Again, they'll play Alabama first on August 30th. That'll be a home game there for Florida State. Again, a very tough game to start off the season. This is a game that probably decides who will probably have a good season the rest of the way, and then the other team probably doesn't make the playoff. I'm not saying that both teams are going to make it to the playoff as of right now, but yeah, this is a tough game for both of these teams to start out the year. But I think it's even more tougher for Florida State because they're just coming off a terrible year last year. We'll have to wait and see what they'll look like here against a very talented Alabama team. After that, they'll play East Texas A&M on September 6th, and then they get a bye week here rather early before playing Kent State on September 20th. Then they play Virginia on the road to open up ACC play on September 26th. That game, of course, will be on a Friday. Then they come back at home to play rival Miami on October the 4th. Then they'll play Pittsburgh also at home on October the 11th. Then they travel out west to Stanford on October 18th, and then they get their second bye week before playing Wake Forest on November 1st. So the bye weeks don't really set up well here for Florida State. I think you'd rather have the first bye week right before playing the rivalry game against Miami, and you also like to have the bye week right before playing Clemson on the road. But they will play Clemson on the road there on November 8th. Then they come back at home to play Virginia Tech on November 15th. Then they go on the road to play NC State on a Friday night, November 21st, and then they close things out with the rivalry against Florida on the road on November 29th. So that's the schedule. It's a pretty tough schedule for Florida State. Again, when you add Alabama and Florida both in the non-conference, and then you got Miami and Clemson, your two biggest games on this schedule. I mean, the schedule could be a lot worse, but it is a tough schedule in my opinion here for the Seminoles. So let's now get a projection here for Florida State based on how tough this schedule is. This is the scale I'll be using here for their projection. So if it's a 1% game in the red, pretty much that's counted as an automatic loss. And then your 20% games in the orange, those are games where Florida State will be a double-digit underdog. 40% games in the yellow, they'll be a clear underdog here by about a touchdown, so 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that point range. And then your 50-50 games will stay in the white, games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games in the purple, those are games where Florida State will be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. And then your 80% games in the blue, those are games where Florida State will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points. And then your 99% games in the green, those are your easy wins. So we'll start with the easy wins here in this percentage for Florida State. I think you got a couple of them, and that's 2 out of your 4 non-conference games, East Texas A&M and Kent State. These are 2 games that Florida State definitely should be able to take care of business in. I get it, they lost to a group of 5 team last year in Memphis, but Kent State was one of the worst teams in the country last year. If you look at their record, they almost went winless last year in college football. So yeah, they definitely should be able to take care of business against the Golden Flashes. And then East Texas A&M, don't really know much about them. They're an FCS team. So yeah, I think both of these games, Florida State will be favored in both of them. They're not guaranteed wins, but they're counted as wins in this projection. And I think both of those games are definitely over that 95 to 99% mark. But then I look at the rest of the schedule here. I don't have any games for Florida State where I think they'll be favored by double digits in the blue, and then same thing in the purple. I don't think Florida State's going to be favored in any more of these games by a touchdown either, by 6 or 7 points, but I do have 4 games on here where I think Florida State will be an underdog in. I don't have any games, though, in the red or the orange, but I do have 4 games on here in the yellow, like I mentioned. And those 4 games are Alabama, Miami, Clemson, and Florida. So I think Florida State will be a clear underdog in all 4 of these games. They'll be about a touchdown underdog by 6 or 7 points. Again, Alabama, pretty tough game to start out the year. Don't really know how good Florida State obviously is going to be in this first game because it's a early season kickoff, and they're coming off a disappointing year last year. So we're going to find out how good Florida State actually is better and see if they'll be better compared to last year. Maybe they are better. Maybe it just is a tough schedule because, like I said, Florida State, after a very terrible season last year, can they turn things around? That'll be the question mark there. And then, of course, you got Miami, the rivalry game. I think, of course, Florida State will be a clear underdog in this game. Miami is a very talented team. That's the reason why I just, kind of favor Miami in this game as of right now. And then, of course, Clemson and Florida. Both of those games are on the road. That's the reason why they fall in the yellow. Clemson on the road in Death Valley, very tough place to play. And then Florida, I get it. The Gators are a rivalry game. Anything can happen in this one, but I just look at this Florida team. Playing at home in the Swamp, that's going to be a very tough place to play, in my opinion, as well. So those are your 4 games where I think Florida State will be a 6 or 7 point underdog. Let's now get a projected record here for Florida State for 2025. So we count the green games as wins. And I also forgot to mention the 50-50 games. You got 6 total 50-50 games. Virginia, Pittsburgh, Stanford, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and NC State. These are all games that really can go either way. So now what I was saying here, the green games are counted as wins. The yellow games, we average them out at 40%. And then you average out these 50-50 games at 50%. And then let's say they split these 50-50 games. Let's say they win 3 out of the 6 50-50 games. You count the green games more as wins, and then that's going to give you 5 wins total. And that is what the projected record is, 5-7 for Florida State. So the projection saying they are going to come up just short of making it to a bowl game for 2025. I really don't know if Florida State is going to have a turnaround of a season, but it might be a little bit of a better record, but it is just really hard to tell how good this team is going to be just based off of what they did last year. I think best case scenario 6-6 probably at best because, this schedule is tough. That's the reason why the projection does come out to 5-7. Again, we got Alabama in the non-conference and then also Florida. That makes the schedule a lot tougher, and then you got Miami and Clemson in 2 big games in the yellow as well. I think they're pretty winnable. It does give them a chance here to pull off some of these upsets here in the yellow, and I think worst case is probably 4-8 to be honest, but if they go 4-8 or worse, then that could be the end of the Mike Norvell era here at Florida State. But this team has got a lot of talent. They do recruit well in the transfer portal, and they also recruit some really good players in the recruiting class, but we'll see if they can turn things around. But 5-7 is the projected record here for Florida State for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me know down in the comments below, and also give me your thoughts about Florida State's schedule. Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.